One morning, I boarded the bus earlier than usual, hoping to catch some quiet before heading to my sister's real estate office. The city was still waking up, the streets dappled with the soft glow of streetlights fading in the morning sun. I clutched my bag tightly, balancing my coffee in one hand and mentally preparing for a busy day. The bus hummed softly as it began its route, the familiar rhythm soothing me in a way that made the world feel almost safe, almost predictable. That's when I noticed him. An older man, perhaps in his late 70s, struggling to maintain his balance as the bus jolted forward. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the overhead rail, and his eyes, though sharp, looked tired and wary. There was a hesitancy in his movements, a vulnerability that tugged at something deep inside me. Without thinking, I stood and offered him my seat, smiling gently. "Please, take it," I said, guiding him toward it. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, a faint smile flickering across his face. "Thank you, young lady. That's very kind of you," he said, his voice soft and almost fragile. There was a pause, as if he had something weighing on his mind, something he didn't dare speak aloud. I gestured for him to sit, and he obeyed, resting his hands on the cane he had brought with him. I returned to my standing spot, gripping the pole for balance. But I found myself glancing back, more than once, drawn to the quiet dignity in his demeanor. There was something familiar about him, though I couldn't place it. His eyes, a pale gray, seemed to hold stories I wasn't meant to know yet. When my stop arrived, I felt a subtle hesitation in my chest. I gathered my things and moved toward the door, expecting him to remain seated, as most passengers would. But when I looked back, he was following me, moving carefully, almost deliberately. "Excuse me," he said as I stepped onto the sidewalk. "Would it be possible for me to come with you, just to your office? I promise I won't be a burden." My first instinct was to decline. Strangers don't usually ask to follow you to your workplace, yet something in his tone, a mix of vulnerability and quiet insistence, made it difficult to refuse. I hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, just to my sister's office," I said, my curiosity mingled with a strange unease. We walked together in silence, the early morning air crisp against our faces. I kept stealing glances at him, noticing the careful way he moved, how his shoes tapped softly against the pavement. There was a sense of purpose in him that didn't quite match his frail appearance, a subtle intensity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. By the time we reached my sister's office, a small building tucked between a coffee shop and a flower store, I was almost regretting my decision. Something about the way he carried himself, the quiet way he surveyed the street before entering, felt deliberate. But it was too late to turn back now. I opened the door, holding it for him, and we stepped inside together, unaware that this small act of kindness would soon unravel the past in ways I could never have imagined. The office smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood, a smell I had always associated with my sister's meticulous nature. She was busy at her desk, typing rapidly on her computer, when I called out her name. "Hey, I'm here." She looked up, blinking, her expression brightening for a brief moment at the sight of me. "Good morning. Coffee?" she asked without looking away from her screen. I smiled and shook my head, glancing at the man who had followed me in. "Actually, someone came with me," I said, gesturing toward him. For a split second, everything in her face changed. The warmth drained away, replaced by something I didn't recognize at first. Fear, I realized too late, creeping in like a shadow. Her eyes widened and her hands hovered over the keyboard, frozen. She slowly pushed her chair back, her movements stiff, as if she were trying to put distance between herself and him without making it obvious. The man's eyes met hers, calm and unwavering, and a faint, knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. That smile was enough to make my sister's complexion turn pale, her lips pressing into a thin line. I had never seen her like this, not even during the most stressful deals or toughest clients. Her reaction sent a shiver down my spine. "Margaret," she whispered, almost like a prayer, almost like a warning. The word was heavy, filled with tremors of old pain. I looked at her, confused, and then at the man. There was a strange tension in the air, thick enough to choke. He straightened, leaning slightly on his cane, and spoke in a voice that was calm but deliberate. "It's been a long time," he said softly, as if addressing her alone. Her eyes narrowed, and she rose from her chair slowly, placing her hands firmly on the desk. Her voice, though barely above a whisper, carried a note of steel. "You shouldn't be here. I told you never to come back." I watched silently, my heart thumping, sensing that I had stumbled into something far more complicated than a morning visit. The man's expression didn't waver. He simply tilted his head slightly, his eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and something darker I couldn't yet name. "You were very convincing back then," he said, his words measured, almost cruel in their calmness. "I almost forgot how skilled you were at hiding things, at pretending everything was fine while the truth simmered beneath the surface." Her hands trembled slightly, and I noticed the way her shoulders stiffened as if bracing for a fight. "You've caused enough trouble in my life," she said, her voice shaking now with barely contained emotion. "Go. Leave before anyone else sees you." He chuckled softly, a low, almost menacing sound that filled the small office. "I didn't come here to cause trouble. Not exactly. I came to remind you, Margaret, of the promises you made, the deals you broke, and the trust you betrayed." My stomach twisted. I didn't fully understand the depth of what had happened, but I could see it in her eyes, the raw, painful history that stretched between her and him, a history that had left scars she'd never mentioned. I realized then that this man, who had seemed so harmless on the bus, was a ghost from her past. A ghost she had hoped never to see again. I felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever had happened between them, I couldn't let her face it alone. But as I watched them, I understood that this confrontation was not something that could be easily stopped. This man had come prepared, and my sister's fear told me he had already won in some way I couldn't yet measure. The air in the office was thick with tension, and I knew, with an unsettling certainty, that the calm morning I had imagined was gone forever. The past had walked in with him, and now we were trapped in a web of old betrayals, lies, and grudges that demanded resolution. The office felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in as the past began to seep into the present. I stood silently, my bag forgotten at my feet, watching the exchange between my sister and the man. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hands gripping the edge of her desk as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but sharp, slicing through the thick tension. "You have no right to be here. Do you even remember what you did?" she demanded. The man's eyes softened for a brief second, but the shadow behind them didn't vanish. "Oh, I remember everything, Margaret. Every promise, every lie, every little betrayal." His words were precise, deliberate, like knives coated in honey. "And I also remember how carefully you built your empire while pretending to be untouchable. You thought you could leave me behind, didn't you?" Her lips trembled. She looked away, staring at the papers on her desk as if they could shield her from him. Slowly, the story began to unfold. Not for me, not yet fully, but in pieces that cut me to the bone. Years ago, long before I even knew her struggles, my sister had trusted him. They had worked together on real estate deals, partnerships meant to last, to build something strong. She had believed in him, but he had been clever, patient, manipulative. While she poured herself into the business, he had quietly siphoned opportunities, undermined her at every turn, and used her own reputation against her. Deals she thought were secure vanished overnight. Money, clients, credibility, all vanished under his careful orchestration. And the worst part, she admitted to me later in a whisper, was the humiliation. He had made it seem as if she were incompetent, as if her hard work had been nothing. "He ruined everything," I murmured softly, more to myself than anyone else. "Yes," she said, finally meeting my eyes. They were red-rimmed, weary, but filled with a fierce, simmering anger that had never left her. And I had to rebuild it all alone. Every client, every property, every single relationship. It took years to recover what he destroyed in months. The man's smile was cold, triumphant, almost casual. "And now you've rebuilt," he said. "Stronger, smarter. But do you think you're free from the past? That past doesn't forgive, Margaret. It doesn't forget." I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. My heart ached seeing her pain, feeling her helplessness, but also her resilience. She had survived him once, and she would survive him again. But only if we acted carefully. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. He tilted his head, studying me, then my sister, as if measuring how much strength remained between us. "Closure," he said softly. "Or, perhaps, justice. You see, Margaret, justice is relative. To me, justice means reminding people of what they owe, reminding them of the power I once had over them." Her jaw tightened, a quiet storm brewing behind her eyes. "You won't intimidate me anymore," she said, her voice stronger now. "I am not the same person you left behind. I won't let you hurt me or anyone I care about again." I could feel the tension crackle in the room like electricity, the kind that promised a storm was coming. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And for the first time, I understood that revenge wouldn't come from anger alone. It would come from planning, patience, and using the man's own hubris against him. The old man leaned back slightly, still smiling faintly, but I could see a flicker of something behind his eyes. Curiosity, and perhaps the first hint of doubt. He had underestimated us, underestimated my sister's resilience, and now he had walked into a trap he couldn't yet see. And in that quiet, tense office, I made a silent vow. We would not be afraid. Not anymore. The office was silent for a moment, the kind of silence that feels heavy with unspoken words and memories. My sister and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. He had come expecting fear, perhaps compliance, maybe even awe. Instead, he found determination and quiet strategy. Over the next few days, we began our plan. We documented everything: the old deals, the contracts he had manipulated, the communications he had twisted. My sister, with her keen eye for detail, uncovered emails, old recordings, and signed papers that proved his schemes beyond doubt. Every piece of evidence told the story he had hoped to erase, and every piece gave us leverage he didn't expect us to have. We didn't confront him directly at first. Instead, we gathered allies, clients, former partners, and colleagues who had been quietly affected by him. One by one, we presented the truth carefully, without accusation, letting the facts speak for themselves. His reputation, built over decades of charm and deception, began to crack under the weight of his own actions. When we finally invited him back to the office under the guise of reconciliation, I could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He expected submission, but instead, he found evidence spread across the desk, witnesses waiting in adjacent rooms, and a calm, unwavering resolve in my sister's gaze. You can't possibly think," he began. But my sister cut him off, her voice steady and cold. "The truth doesn't need my permission," she said. "Every contract you manipulated, every promise you broke, every person you used for your gain, it's all documented. And it's all going public." He faltered, just slightly, the first crack in his carefully constructed arrogance. His smile, which had once been so self-assured, wavered. He tried to speak, tried to regain control, but each word only highlighted his failures. Each gesture betrayed his growing panic. I watched, my heart thumping, as my sister calmly guided him through the consequences of his actions. It wasn't anger that defeated him, it was truth, exposure, and the quiet strength of two people who refused to be intimidated. The man who had once held so much power over her now had nothing but the weight of his own lies pressing down. Finally, he left. Not with a dramatic outburst, not with threats or violence, just quietly, defeated, and perhaps for the first time in years, aware of the harm he had caused. The office felt lighter, the air freer, as though a shadow had finally been lifted. My sister sank into her chair, exhausted but victorious. I sat beside her, offering a cup of coffee in silence. We didn't need to speak, the relief and triumph were enough. She had survived him before, but this time she had won without compromise, without stooping to anger. Later, as we walked out into the soft glow of evening, I realized something important. Kindness is not weakness, and strength does not always come from force. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is watching truth prevail, watching those who once threatened you crumble under the weight of their own misdeeds. We laughed softly, a mixture of relief and disbelief, and I felt a deep sense of pride, not just for my sister, but for ourselves. The morning that began with a simple act of helping an old man on the bus had led us through fear, pain, and betrayal. But it had also brought us closer, made us stronger, and taught us that courage and cleverness can outshine even the darkest shadows. And as we locked the office door behind us, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Fear had lost its grip, and justice, quiet, patient, and sweet, had finally been served.